OK, today is the second anniversary of the election of the Albanese Labor government, and there's one overarching question hanging over this country. What is the point of Anthony Albanese as Prime Minister of Australia? What is the point of Albo? Let me start with the issue I just spoke about, the Middle East war, probably the gravest international flashpoint in the world right now, an area where there are stark choices for global security, for sovereign and democratic rights, for basic human rights, and for the defeat of Islamist extremist terrorism. These choices about national interests and national values are so stark that even the US president, yes, even sleepy Joe Biden, found a few words of moral clarity.
Let me be clear. We reject the ICC's application for arrest warrants against Israeli leaders. Whatever these warrants may imply, there is no equivalence between Israel and Hamas. Contrary to allegations against Israel made by the International Court of Justice, what's happening is not genocide. We reject that. We will always stand with Israel.
Well said, Mr. President. So what about our Prime Minister? What point would Albo make on such a fundamental issue?
US President Joe Biden says seeking the arrest warrants of Israeli leaders is outrageous. Do you agree with him?
Well, I don't comment on court processes in Australia, let alone court processes globally, of which Australia is not a party.
Do you agree with Joe Biden's comments? And is it
I just answered the same question. Look, I don't comment on court proceedings.
What's the point? What's the point of Albo? He's got nothing to say. This claptrap about not commenting on court cases is pathetic. It's nonsense. It's just an excuse to say nothing. Either Albo doesn't know the facts, doesn't know what he wants to say, or he doesn't have the backbone to stand up for Australia's values. Is he too scared to speak the truth? Worried about an electoral backlash from the feral left of his own party, or from the Greens, or the university activists, or from Muslim communities in crucial seats? This is a terrible indictment on Albo, but it's also a reflection on Australia. This is the lily-livered view of the world that Australia now projects. But it gets worse, because another Labor minister isn't so shy. Chris Bowen took a break from destroying our electricity grid today to undermine our global standing, offering support not for Israel, but for the false equivalence from the ICC.
Well, I respect the International Criminal Court and I respect the work they do, and international law must be respected. International law, of course, was not respected by Hamas. Israel must respect international law. We respect the work of the International Criminal Court. International law must always be observed, and nobody gets a free pass from that.
Just terrible, turning their backs on decency, on liberty and on our allies in favour of anti-Israel bile from the UN crowd. Still, getting back to Albo, remember, this is the bloke who promised to stand up and be accountable for his actions.
If I'm Prime Minister, I'll accept responsibility each and every day.
Okay.
I'll work hard and I'll accept responsibility, not always seek to blame someone else.
That was a fine sentiment, wasn't it? But it's turned into a major broken promise, because Albanese has turned blaming others and shirking responsibility into an art form. Remember what he said about immigration detainees out on bail and allegedly bashing people?
It's inappropriate to comment further, given it's in the middle of the investigation by WA Police. Of course, state bail schemes are run by the states by definition as well. Given the matter is under investigation before the police and the courts, it's inappropriate to comment further.
Yeah, Albo loves a court case, gives him an excuse to try to say nothing. Remember what he said about monitoring these criminal immigration detainees after they'd been freed.
The Community Protection Board is, of course, a board that's independent of politicians. It's not appropriate for me to comment on individual cases.
They make their decisions independent. Well, they make the decisions independent. One of the things that we have in this country is a separation there.
Another hand pass. Apparently the Prime Minister is in charge of nothing. Take GST allocations to the states.
Well, the Commonwealth Grants Commission operates at arm's length from the government. It's not something that my government has direct involvement in.
Always someone there, isn't there, to pass the buck on to or to blame? Like for the interest rate rises that he promised to ease?
The Reserve Bank of Australia are an independent body and the government doesn't direct them on what to do.
But of course, even for the Indigenous voice, a proposal worked up over 2 decades that only lasted a few months in his hands.
This is not my proposal, this is the Australian people's proposal.
Nothing sticks with this guy. He accepts no responsibility for anything, even on electricity prices, and his promise to lower them, the blame was sheeted elsewhere.
We know that there's been an impact of global energy prices. We live in a global community.
The Ukraine war started.
It goes on, doesn't it? Take border protection and the arrival of asylum seeker boats. Yet again, Albo just looks for excuses not to say or do anything.
I've been travelling in the car, so I'm not. I haven't been advised about that.
This is not just a pattern anymore. This is the overarching characteristic of this Prime Minister. Albo is always keen to buck pass. He's always keen to blame others. He's always telling us that it's someone else's job or not his responsibility. And far too often he either chooses not to speak at all or he gives us a word salad that means nothing anyway. And this is most certainly not what he promised.
I won't blame someone else. I'll accept responsibility. That's what leaders do. The Prime Minister never bothers to live up to his job title. A Prime Minister who never takes responsibility and only ever looks to blame others. Is there any issue in which Scott Morrison doesn't blame someone else, in which he doesn't take responsibility?
So surely all this then adds up to another broken promise from Anthony Albanese. If he doesn't want to say anything, doesn't want to do anything, doesn't want to accept responsibility for anything, and doesn't want to impose himself on any issues, then what is the point of Prime Minister Albanese? I honestly don't know. And that means our federal government and our nation are just drifting, being shaped by events rather than shaping them. That's a pretty sad turn of events at the best of times, but in such turbulent times strategically and economically, it's downright dangerous.